Okay, so the thing is that there are going to be differences between Western and Indian psychology, and also to know that, what are the implications of these differences as far as mental health is concerned. And to see that, gosh, there's something wrong with the Zoom. Give me 1 minute, okay?
Vivek, if you can request speaker to switch out the video, maybe the bandwidth is not um, sufficient.
Okay, so
Just text him or
Yeah, I think there was an issue with the network. Everybody can hear me and see the slides now.
now we can see the slides and also we can clearly hear you.
Very good. Okay. So I was talking about the differences between Western and Indian psychology, and that we can see the differences are there. Now, if you look at mental health or even human condition and human living from the Bhagavad Gita, then we get also another very different perspective, especially coming from Indian psychology. So there is a whole psychology of Bhagavad Gita that we can look at and see, what Bhagavad Gita is talking about in terms of not only well-being, but also in terms of spiritual transformation and also in terms of mental health. So then we are going to particularly look at one part of Bhagavad Gita slightly more in detail, which is the contemplative perspective. Now, what do we mean by contemplative perspective is that when we talk about meditation, for example, when we talk about samadhi, when we talk about, dhyana, then how does that relate to Indian psychology, and what is the psychology behind dhyana, and how does it help mental health? And then I'm going to just briefly talk about why Bhagavad Gita is still relevant in modern times, okay? Because it is. We may think, oh, this is a very old text. How can it be useful to me in these times, right? But it is, and I'll explain why it is relevant in the modern times. So let's first of all look at what are the differences and why between Western psychology and Indian psychology. So there's something called ontology. Ontology means that study of nature of being, existence, or reality. Okay, ontology is the study of what exists out there. What is your reality? What do you think is real, and what do you think is not real, and what is the nature of being? Okay, and so what entities exist and how these can be grouped and related within a hierarchy. So existence, we are basically talking about ontology as existence. And the thing about this ontology, it helps us to structure knowledge about the world or a specific domain in a certain way. And the next part of this kind of thinking about these fundamental differences is to consider epistemology. Now, epistemology refers to the nature, origin, scope, and validity of knowledge. Now, very simply put, it means that what knowledge is, how it is acquired, and the extent to which a particular subject or entity can be known. Okay? And it is important that we understand this very fundamental nature of knowledge so that we can begin to see where the differences are coming from. So the differences arise in knowledge systems because ontology and epistemologies are different in different traditions. I suggest you check your mic because somebody's mic is on. Okay, so fundamentally speaking, we have to kind of go to the root of the issue as why these differences are there and what makes these differences arise. Okay, and we have to consider the ontology of a tradition and the epistemology of a tradition to really understand where these differences are. And this is really the beginning of dialogue to understand these differences. Okay, so for example, when I was working in interfaith, I worked a lot I still working on interfaith, even here in India, is that how do we understand different traditions? How do we understand my tradition, which is the Hindu tradition, against something which is a Jewish tradition or a pagan tradition or a Islam tradition? And how do we see these differences in terms of ontology and epistemology? So it is a very useful way of trying to understand the differences between various different traditions. So ontology, epistemology, and knowledge system, okay, now to look at it in a simple way, what is reality? Okay, and reality consists of a systems of belief which we have about anything, right? My system of belief may not necessarily be the same as your belief system, and therefore my reality is shaped by my own beliefs, and your beliefs are shaping your reality. And the second question, which is the epistemological question, is how do we know reality? What are the means of knowledge? So on the one hand, there is reality. Secondly, how do we know that reality? And if we think about, what do we believe in the world? So for example, I can ask you the question, do you believe in ghost and spirit? And you may say, no, I don't believe. And I ask you, why don't you believe? What is the means of knowledge? Or if you say, yes, I believe in ghost and spirit, then I can ask you, what is the means of knowledge which you are using in order to know whether a ghost exists or not? Okay, these are the questions which this knowledge systems will provide. And therefore, knowledge system is equal to a paradigm and it is equal to a worldview. So each one of us has got a worldview, right? That is what makes us different, is that our differences arise. Why? Because we believe in different things. And we believe in different things because we know ways of knowing these things and also where my beliefs are coming from through a certain means of knowledge. Okay, so these differences are marked by what we believe in. Somebody's mic is on again. Okay. What do we believe in? And also that how do I believe in what I believe? These are the two fundamental questions of these paradigms. And of course, these are all related together in terms of what is going on. Now, if you think about, this in a slightly different way, in the context of what I'm going to be talking about, is that there are Indian philosophical spiritual traditions. Okay. And we know there's spiritual traditions in India, many. For example, if we talk about the Hindu traditions, we've got Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Uttar Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa, Dvaita Vedanta, Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, so many different traditions, philosophical traditions, and they've got a different set of beliefs which each one is having about their tradition. And from there, we can see that there are Indian psychological concepts and models which can be derived from these philosophical spiritual traditions to tell us about the psychological dimensions of these spiritual traditions. So there is a relationship between these. And my work at Oxford University was looking at the Yoga Sutra in a lot of detail, going sutra by sutra, 195 sutras, which I examine to see where is the psychology in this particular sutra. And that through that kind of work, I derived the whole kind of framework of thinking about psychology from the Yoga Sutra point of view. And then we have got the Western psychological traditions. Okay, so we got the Indian psychological philosophical tradition, we got the psychological tradition from the West, and then we got Indian psychological concepts and models, which can also be then compared to this kind of way of understanding. Where is the psychology in terms of Indian psychology? Where is the Western psychology? How do they understand it? And therefore, this begins the dialogue between mental health from these two different perspectives. Okay, so now if we kind of think about what are the fundamental differences between Western and Indian psychology, is number one, the nature of being. Nature of being, Western psychology predominantly materialistic in its ontology. So it just believes in material world, right? Western psychology focuses on observable phenomena and physical processes which are underlying this kind of materialistic ontology. So basically, Western psychology is based on the scientific paradigm. Why? Because the Western psychology developed as a scientific tradition only in the 19th century, when 1879, when William Wundt, the German, actually founded his first experimental psychology laboratory in Vienna. So now if we see that, these kind of traditions which are there, Western psychology, Western science, these are kind of arising through observation of phenomena, physical processes, and trying to understand these processes and to make something out of it. So predominantly materialistic. It says that consciousness and mental states arise from physical processes, primarily neurobiological activities. Okay. Now, what it means is that whatever you and I are experiencing at this moment, you are experiencing something. I'm also experiencing myself talking. Okay. Now, where is all this coming from? According to Western psychology, this is because of the brain and what processing is going on. A tremendous amount of complex processes which are going on in the brain, which gives rise to this phenomena, which I'm now experiencing as mental phenomena, including perception of the outside world, including my thinking process, including my emotion, whatever it is arising out of the physical processes of the brain. What Indian psychology says, it is grounded in spiritual ontology, which means that Indian psychology considered consciousness as the fundamental aspect of reality, not matter, because Western psychology says matter is the fundamental reality according to how they think about it. Indian psychology says, well, we are considering consciousness as the fundamental aspect of reality, independent of physical processes. A huge difference between the nature of our being from the Indian point of view, Indian psychological point of view, and the Western psychological point of view. So this is where now the differences come about. And if we go back to ontology, epistemology, as I was explaining earlier on, it means that, the ontology of Western psychology is based on materialistic, scientific way of understanding this world, including the brain and mental processes. Whereas Indian psychology said that the fundamental aspect of reality is not matter, but it is consciousness, and it is also independent of physical processes. Very different point of view. And the individual consciousness, which you and I are experiencing at the moment, is interconnected with the universal consciousness, a concept which is absent in most of the Western frameworks. So here is a fundamental difference. What is the nature of reality and the nature of being? So the implications for self-concept, now, if you think that, these are two different ways of understanding human being. So I tell my students here, the person in Western psychology is very different from the jiva in Indian psychology. And the jiva, self-concept, is very different from the person in Western psychology. So don't kind of, mix them up, because you're going to land in trouble, because you are thinking from two very different perspectives. So in Western psychology, self is often seen as a separate entity, an ego operating independently. Okay, it's a separate entity. So I, as a subject, individual ego, is working in the world as a separate entity. In contrast, Indian psychology presents a self-concept that is intrinsically linked to the broader spiritual reality, often leading to a non-dualistic understanding of self and the other. What it means that I'm not alone. Number one, I'm not alone as this human being. I'm interconnected not only with other human beings, but I'm interconnected to the whole universe. And universe, the underlying reality of the whole universe is consciousness. And that consciousness is the one which connects all of us into one particular reality. Whereas in Western psychology, no, we are independent, and therefore we are all alone in this world. Okay. Again, it has got implication for psychology and mental health as well. Because if I see myself separate, completely apart from everybody, I'm existing on my own. There is nobody connecting with me. But if I look at it from the self-concepts, from Indian spiritual reality point of view, then I'm connected with everything. And there are ways I can connect with it through some kind of mental processes. Number four is that the influence on health and well-being. So Western models typically address mental and physical health separately or as cause or as causally related, right? So mental health, physical health, sometimes is kind of talked about together. Indian psychology promotes an integrated approach where the body is not separate from the mind and the mind is not separate from the body. Each one is affecting each other, which has again got implication in terms of health and well-being. So this is where spiritual health is seen as a central to overall well-being in all its dimensions, right? So again, we see these are nature of being. There is a difference, four differences arising very fundamentally between Western and Indian psychology. Secondly, if you look at the epistemological differences, what is the nature of knowledge? So empirical and analytical emphasis in Western psychology. Western psychology relies substantially on empirical evidence and scientific method, which is what I mentioned earlier on, is that it is science-based psychology. Okay, and it relies on empirical evidence and scientific method. And Western psychology accepted as having this kind of evidence base. It values quantification, statistical analysis as a means to acquire, validate knowledge, and focusing on objectivity and reproducibility. So scientific tradition emphasizing objectivity, measurement, quantification, statistical analysis to say what is there in terms of the way, what exists and how does it exist. What are the means of knowing that? Observation and hypothesis and theory and scientific paradigm. Whereas in Indian psychology, we talk about intuitive and experiential learning in Indian psychology, significant emphasis on subjective experience, introspection as a valid source of knowledge. So it says you don't have to be objective, you don't have to be scientific, you can go within yourself. And going within yourself, you become intuitive, understanding things without any kind of experiment. Okay, it appreciates textual authority from ancient scriptures and the experiential realization of these texts through personal practice. So you see how far we are. Okay, we don't say we deny objectivity and measurement at all. What we are saying is that this is a different way of coming to this knowledge about ourselves, knowledge about the world. And if you look at some of the fantastic discoveries which have been made in India and Indian science and Indian psychology, I mean, it's mind-boggling to see where this was coming from. And these are now being validated by Western science. So it is working the other way around. But really speaking, the emphasis here is on intuitive and experiential learning, which is the focus in Indian psychology as to how the knowledge is going to be derived. Number three is the role of meditation and introspection. In Western psychology, introspection was largely abandoned in the early 20th century for being too subjective. And there is a reason for that. I mean, we don't have to go into that, but Western psychology was trying to establish itself as a natural science, and therefore it kind of took on the various different things from natural science. And therefore introspection was taken by, the initial psychologists, but then they abandoned, saying, no, this is not the right way of doing things. Whereas Indian psychology continues to uphold meditation, introspective practices, not only as the epistemological method, but also as a therapeutic tool to understand mind and consciousness. See, again, you see the differences between the nature of knowledge, epistemological differences. Fourth thing is that holistic and reductionist approaches are there. So Western psychology often adopts a reductionist approach, breaking down phenomena into smaller measurable units. So, for example, if I talk about I'm having this kind of thought process which is going on, thought process is the mental phenomena. It is now reduced to the brain activity in the brain. In the brain, there are various circuits which are responsible for my cognition and my perception. Now, which are the circuits which are active during the time I'm thinking about something? So it's breaking down even more right up to the cellular level, whereby the neurons are identified as having certain role to play in terms of my thinking. I'm only aware of my thinking. I'm not aware of anything else which is going on. But Western psychology reduces everything to its fundamental elements, which it believes is giving rise to this phenomena. Indian psychology, however, is a holistic approach and viewing the individual and their experience within the larger cosmic and spiritual framework. So rather than going down into more and more and more, smaller and smaller elements, Indian psychology thinks in a cosmic level, holistic approach, but even at the cosmic level, it is including everything, very holistic in terms of not only the individual, but in terms of the whole cosmos. This is really another big difference, right? So this is the fourth difference. Now, what are the implications of these differences, right? So I've explained to you where these differences arise from, what are these differences, and how do we see one paradigm as very different from another paradigm. Question for us is really, can we even bridge these two different traditions, right? Can we even think about how we can connect these traditions in such a way that it makes some kind of bridge which allows us to not only have a dialogue between the two traditions, but to do something useful with that dialogue. Okay, and this is what I'm doing here at Chinmaya Vishwa Vidyapith. I'm teaching Indian psychology, but at the same time, we've got a central of Indian knowledge systems with a CKS IKS integration innovation framework, which means the Indian knowledge systems, contemporary knowledge system, how can we integrate them and also find innovation, new ways of thinking about various different things. Okay, so what are the implications of this holistic versus fragmented approaches? Western psychology often fragmented approach to health, focusing separately on mental, emotional, physical aspects of health. Indian psychology, holistic approach, again, as I was saying, it interconnected system right up to the cosmic level, understanding of the self and healing. Western psychology, self is often viewed as an independent entity, primarily influenced by biological and environmental factors, whereas Indian psychology emphasizes the non-dualistic view of the self, interconnected with other beings and also with the whole universe. This is the holistic understanding of individuals. Now, these healing practices, therefore, not only target the individual symptoms, but also their spiritual and relational disharmonies. See, when you have a holistic system, then you've got several different factors which are then can be used in terms of understanding where these symptoms are arising from, and using methods like meditation and yoga and community engagement become part of maintaining this healing practices to help people and individuals. So number three is evidence and treatment validation. So Western psychology relies heavily on empirical research, controlled experiments to validate treatments. Indian psychology values experiential knowledge, subjective insights, which may not easily fit into the standard empirical research models. See, this is another difference. And therefore, for example, if I say, why don't you have Ayurveda in the national health system? People have been trying to do that for a long time. But the immediate barrier to do that, where is the evidence for this? And if there's no evidence, we cannot accept it. Okay, that is the usual barrier of engaging with Indian psychology and Indian healing traditions. Now, patient engagement and empowerment. So, Western psychology often positions the therapist or clinician as the expert, with the patient receiving treatment in a somewhat passive manner. Indian psychology says, no, you must be an active participant in your own healing process and fostering a greater personal insight and self-awareness. See, again, it comes to a difference in terms of this dynamic between the therapist or a clinician and the patient. It is a very different way of how an Indian psychologist would approach the client. For example, the Ayurvedic doctor will ask you so many questions about, your environment, what are you eating, what is your daily routine, what is your seasonal routine, dinacharya, ritucharya, and how are you then adjusting yourself according to that? He wants to know that. So, it is a very kind of ecosystem-based way of thinking about the individual and the healing process. Okay, now let's come to the Bhagavad Gita, because this is what all of you have been waiting for. I know we've run out of time sooner or later, but let me carry on. So now, if you think about mental health, well-being, and WHO and the mental health, you see, WHO, talks about mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their ability, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively, fruitfully, and can contribute to their community. This is WHO definition, and it acknowledges the importance of spirituality in mental health. Okay, so quality of life instrument includes spirituality as one of the core domains to assess an individual's well-being, recognizing that spiritual beliefs and practices are integral to many people's experience of life, by extension, their mental and physical health. Now, this was only included very recently. When I talk recently, in the last 15, 20 years, is that spiritual dimension has come into that. So what about the spiritual dimension as we kind of explore Bhagavad Gita's teaching? And it is very much aligned with Bhagavad Gita's teaching, because spirituality essentially is what Bhagavad Gita is teaching about, but it is talking about spirituality in the sense of the goal of life is a spiritual goal. And it recognizes, WHO also recognizes essential aspect of quality of life informing value, meaning, direction of human life. Okay, so in the context of mental health, spirituality, religion plays a very significant role. And several studies point out a positive association between religious involvement and better mental health, better health also. And these are the references you can look up as well. So Bhagavad Gita actually brings together the philosophical and practical parts of the spiritual journey together. Okay. From the perspective of Bhagavad Gita, mental health could be understood as a state of inner harmony, balance, self-realization, or self-knowledge through spiritual practice prescribed in the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, already we are now talking about states which are actually very mentally healthy, inner harmony. If we talk about, mental illness, we are talking about disharmony, we are talking about imbalance, we are talking about lack of self-knowledge. And therefore, the central teachings of the Bhagavad Gita emphasize what? Importance of self-knowledge, importance of discipline, and importance of practice of yoga in the broadest sense of as a union, and also maintaining mental stability, detachment from life's dualities such as pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, success and failure. So these are very important teachings. These are central teachings of Bhagavad Gita, and we can see, I will show you how it is related to mental health. So the Gita's emphasis on self-knowledge aligns with the contemporary understanding of mental health, which views self-awareness as a crucial component of psychological well-being. So I have to teach my, counseling students, students who are practicing psychotherapy, I actually teach them how to be more self-aware themselves, because that self-awareness will create a self-awareness in themselves through which they can help the client or the patient. Very important in terms of psychological well-being. And the Gita's teaching on discipline resonate with modern therapeutic approaches that stress the importance of self-regulation, coping strategies in managing mental health issues. Okay, this is all research done by various people and showed that there is a connection between psychological well-being and mental health and the kind of techniques which are given in the Bhagavad Gita. Now let's look at the analysis of human suffering according to Bhagavad Gita. Now I've kind of drawn this out of the whole understanding of Bhagavad Gita. So what is the problem? The problem is Jiva Vishad. Jiva Vishad consisting of what? So Arjuna is displaying some of the symptoms of mental, unwellness, in the sense that he is mentally distressed. And this consists of Shoka Moha Bhaya, grief because his kith and kin, his elders, his teachers are going to die. He is in a state of delusion, confusion. Delusion basically is confusion, and anxiety. So you can see already these are the three things which all of us suffer from one time or the other. And Bhagavad Gita is not only meant for Arjuna. Actually, Arjuna is just a representative of humanity. And therefore, whatever he's suffering, each one of us is going to suffer. And therefore, Bhagavad Gita applies to all of us in the sense that it is something which is going to help all of us. And therefore, knowing what the problem is, Jiva Vishad, Shoka Moha Bhaya, then what is the solution? Jiva Sadhana, letting go, basically. Tyaga, mine, and sannyasa, me, leads to liberation. Not only liberation from the cycle of birth and death, but liberation from suffering in this life and forever. Okay. So we don't have to go towards liberation. I mean, some of the techniques are so wonderful that you start practicing today, you immediately see the effect of that. Okay, and letting go is, people find it very difficult to let go. But these are the techniques which then allow us to go through this whole system of Bhagavad Gita, Karma Yoga, Karma Phala Tyaga, Karma Sannyasa, contemplation, meditation, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and then Saguna Bhakti, which is related to Karma Yoga, and then Nirguna Bhakti, which is related to contemplation and meditation, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga. And this is the pathway it follows towards moksha. See how wonderful this, Bhagavad Gita is. It is my favorite book in terms of guidance, wisdom, and practice. And if you see, read and try to contemplate on something, you find absolutely it's a treasure house of knowledge and wisdom and practice. And basically it involves steady renunciation of fruits of action and action itself, disidentifying ourselves from enjoyership, doership, and absorption in the self in meditation. Now these are the spiritual elements of it leading to moksha. But really, while we are on this pathway, all the techniques which we need to become resilient and to have mental wellness are all contained in this spiritual pathway, okay, as I will explain just now. So this is actually a mental health holistic solution. So now let me explore it a bit deeper. Now, what are we talking about here? Because we have got, so many ideas which we've talked about: ontology, epistemology, implications of that. What are the differences? What are the key differences? How we can start thinking about them? So here we have got Hindu philosophical, spiritual knowledge and principles. Secondly, we got the ultimate goal of existence, which he talks about as moksha. All the traditions talk about release, liberation. And they talk about it in different ways, but certainly it comes to that. The ontology, epistemology of human being and being human. Okay, ontology, epistemology, we talked about what does it mean to be human? And who is a human being? And what does it mean to be human? So it is the human condition, which it describes as ignorance of the truth and therefore the nature of suffering. And then what does it do? It gives the pathway to liberation. And essentially, this is a pathway consisting of 3 steps: purification, perfection in purification, and then liberation. Okay. And this you can see coming right from the underlying fundamental philosophical principles, ontological, epistemological principles, coming down to understanding the human being, understanding where this suffering is coming in, what is the human condition, and what is the solution to this suffering is the pathway to liberation. Okay, and so if we look at it, then take it one step further. What are these practices which are going to take us towards, purification and liberation? Karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga. All these are techniques which are there for us to achieve liberation. Now, you may be saying, why are you talking about liberation? This is about mental health. What my proposition is that while you're practicing any of these particular yogas, you will derive the benefit of these traditional practices to have much, much more better mental health. So mental health is a significant byproduct of our spiritual journey. Okay, that is how we should understand it. So it results in inner transformation. Okay, your inner transformation means your belief system is going to change, your attitudes towards the world are going to change, your intentions towards the world are going to change, and therefore your actions will also change. And all that is contained in all these 4 parts of yoga. So what are the outcomes of this inner transformation? Now, this is where you will see what the difference is. Contentment, peace, equanimity. Okay, I'm practicing karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga to whatever extent I am. Then immediately within a few weeks, you begin to feel more contented, more peaceful, more equanimous. And then your mind also becomes very sharp, single pointed. It becomes still, inner peace, subtleness. It can understand things very quickly. And what is this then? How is it related to mental health? It is relief from mental distress. It gives you coping skills. It gives you a huge amount of resilience so that even if you kind of have challenging situation, you bounce back immediately. This is what Bhagavad Gita is giving us. It is a spiritual text, yes, but it is also got practical mental disciplines which are so useful that it can give you very, very good mental health, and it can overcome the constraint and the distress which Arjuna was undergoing, shoka moha bhaya. Who doesn't feel grief in their life? Who doesn't have anxiety? Who doesn't feel depressed? Who doesn't get confused? We all do. And therefore, this is the solution. Okay, that is the solution. So now, if we just think about Karma Yoga, it talks about having a swabhav. And through swadharma, which Bhagavan calls as Buddhi Yoga, is to practice your dharma in a selfless manner. It takes you to understanding your true self. See how wonderful this transformation track is. This is your effort. This is your purushat in terms of the path of Karma Yoga. And if you look at it from another point of view, there is a whole system of understanding how this actually works. So I was talking about purification, and I'll explain what purification is. So we start with an ego operating system where we are suffering. We change over to another operating system, which is called the Dharma operating system. And then we realize who we truly are, and we go into a God operating system. It is now this is the pathway towards realization of the self. But this transition from ego operating system to the Dharma operating system is really the key to our mental health and our mental well-being. This is how Bhagavad Gita explains the inner transformation process, and this is a framework for understanding that. Okay. Now let us look at some of these key concepts. So integrating these concepts of purification, transformation, self-knowledge into mental health involves not just application of specific techniques, but there is an overarching kind of attitude which begins to develop. As we practice more and more of the spiritual path, we begin to see life differently. We begin to see challenges differently. Okay. And it gives us that inner strength. And it offers tools for managing stress, enhancing self-awareness, promoting emotional regulation. And there is a deeper exploration of one's values, beliefs, attitudes, facilitating personal growth and inner transformation. Purification, this is a fundamental concept in Bhagavad Gita, is this Chitta Shuddhi. What is known as Chitta Shuddhi is actually increasing your Sattva Guna. And it is the Rajasic and the Tamasic Guna which are the problematic gunas in our day-to-day life. Not always, but they can cause the problem. So to increase the Sattva Guna means that array of practices, conceptual framework, and removing these mental impurities of Rajas and Tamas and transcending our ego limitations and realizing our true nature. Now, I may be appearing to talk about the spiritual journey, ultimate reality. Please keep the focus in terms of the techniques which are involved in this particular transformation, which are absolutely wonderful techniques for mental health. That is where the focus should be. Now, relevance of these traditional concepts to mental health practices lies in their shared objective of alleviating suffering and fostering state of mental well-being. See, this is what I'm saying. Traditional concepts to mental health practices, shared objective of the spiritual pathway as well. Okay. And one of the key concept, another key concept, core concept is equanimity, samatvam. And this is depicted in the Bhagavad Gita as mental composure, even-mindedness in all circumstances, not easily swayed by life's vicissitudes. Exactly what we need to keep ourselves mentally healthy. Okay, what we need is this mental composure, even-mindedness, so that we are not thrown up and we are not thrown down every time something small happens. No resilience. But samatvam, equanimity, can come through the practice of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and the various practices which are associated with that. So Bhagavan Shri Krishna teaches that one should remain detached from dualities such as gain and loss, pleasure and pain, view them as series in a sense of calmness and impartiality. This is a change in attitude which is going to come. And this quality of equanimity is regarded essential for mental balance and the foundation for spiritual growth and mental well-being. Okay, Rao and Pranjpe have actually written quite a lot about the Indian psychology of Indian traditions, and they have pointed out various research which is actually saying this samatvam bhava can be investigated and also correlated with mental well-being as well. We have done some, student research which has also pointed out how, for example, vairagya can be measured and how it is showing that, people who are inclines towards vairagya have got a better mental health coping strategy. This is all now kind of coming into research as well. So equanimity is the key to achieving harmonious inner balance throughout mental processes, from sensory experience to action outcomes. It moderates the transition from senses to outcome, ensuring a stable mental state. Okay, this provides a stable mental state, and it parallels emotional regulation, an integral part of psychological resilience. And a lot of work which has been done with emotional regulation and how this emotional regulation is associated with, correlated with equanimity, and it's essential for maintaining mental health. So it prevents extreme emotional responses, reducing susceptibility to stress and related disorders. And this equanimity contributes to mental well-being by fostering a balanced and a clear engagement with life's challenges, vicissitudes. Such an approach to emotional challenge is potentially transformative, promoting peace, mental stability, conducive to overall mental health. Okay, so that is the Bhagavad Gita, but I'm going through it quite quickly, but you'll have a chance to kind of listen to it later on. Okay, now taking one thing in particular. So I want to demonstrate how this actually, the larger framework of Bhagavad Gita actually works within a certain practice, and how this practices address psychological disorders. So contemplative practices such as meditation, mindfulness, yoga integrate into psychotherapy through various theoretical frameworks. And these frameworks posit that the root of many of the psychological disorders lies in dysfunctional cognitive emotional processes such as rumination. We keep on thinking, overthinking. Some people say, you're overthinking about this, you're ruminating, you're thinking too much about it. Just let go. Attachment to negative thought patterns. We keep on thinking negative, negative, negative. And there are people who are catastrophic thinkers. They always think the worst of everything. And these are patterns which, normal pattern. People kind of experience this pattern. And although it is not, many people experience, but it leads to painful emotion. And therefore, many of these things are like, we try to avoid this, but disorder lies in this dysfunctional ways of our mind and intellect, our thinking and our emotions. And by fostering a non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, these practices encourage individuals to observe their thoughts, emotion from a distance, reducing their impact and enhancing emotional regulation. Very, very simple exercise I teach the students here. Okay, just step away from the river of the mind. And this is based on the Yoga Sutra Patanjali, where you are able to kind of step away from the processes and the mental thinking and the emotions, step away from that even for 2 minutes. It provides such a lot of relief. Okay, and this enhances emotional regulation. And role of meditation in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, which is really the tradition which talks in a very systematic way about these contemplative practices, dhyana, and meditation is a really critical component of the whole system. So Patanjali defines yoga as a cessation of fluctuations of the mind, okay? Chitta vritti nirodha, establishing meditation as the method for cultivating a state of mental stillness and clarity. Can you see now, Patanjali is saying that if you make your mind to be completely still, you can discover the truth. You can discover that reality called Purusha. We call that in Advaita Vedanta, we call it Brahman. In Yoga Sutra, it is Purusha, because it's based on the Sankhya Yoga system of thinking. So, making the mind to be still and clear. How do we do it? Chitta vritti nirodha. In other words, cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. And the whole system which Patanjali presents is about how to do this, how to make the mind to become still so that we can transcend into that reality. Through dhyana, the practitioner is said to achieve samadhi or absorption, where the meditator merges with the object of meditation, experiencing a state of profound peace and unity. When we have mental kind of illnesses, mental disorders, the inner peace is gone. just like in Arjun's case. His inner peace was gone because he was caught up in this thought process, resulting in Shoka Moha Bhaya. And therefore, Bhagavad Gita was a solution to that. Just I show, Jiva Vishad is Jiva Sadhana. Solution is Jiva Sadhana. 1 minute. Okay, so contemplative practices, these then, the investigation into meditators' influence cognitive processes reveals significant insight on how these ancient practices can enhance mental functioning. And now there's a lot of evidence about what meditation mindfulness does. Mindfulness has become a global phenomena. Where is it coming from? Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. It is coming from the Vedas. It is coming from, well, Buddhism as well. But, this is where insight, clarity, cognitive flexibility, and increasing memory, cognitive capacity, all these are available to us through very simple practices. You don't have to go into samadhi to experience this. All you need to do is pratyahar, dharana, dhyan. These are simple things which anybody can practice on a daily basis. And it strengthens the ability to sustain attention, and evidence suggests that it can bolster memory, cognitive capacity, and there is research which shows it improves working memory capacity, reading comprehension scores, pointing to potential of meditation to enhance cognitive performance in academic and high demand settings. 10-15 minutes of meditation can make you very, very peaceful, but also very efficient and very effective in whatever you're doing. And these improvements in memory cognitive capacity are thought to result from increased neural efficiency and changes in the brain areas. So it does change the brain as well. Okay, if you want to think in terms of the plasticity of the brain and how it can change the brain just through meditation and associated with memory processes. And emotional regulation, this is the other part of it. It provides critical insights how meditative practices can contribute to psychological health and resilience, emotional regulation, and this mechanism through meditation facilitates emotional regulation, its efficacy in managing stress, anxiety, depression. Case studies demonstrate the transformative effects of meditation on emotional states, and meditation contributes emotional regulation through several mechanisms, including increased mindfulness, which enhances awareness, acceptance of emotional experiences, cultivating a non-reactive stance towards experiences, and also they have described how mindfulness strengthens the neural pathways involved in attention control and self-awareness, right? And thereby facilitating emotional regulation. Now, if you remember what I was talking about, the outcomes of the practices, what Bhagavad Gita is talking about and how we can think about it. One of the things was the mind becomes really single-pointed. Single-pointedness is total attentional control, and therefore it provides a very specific way of controlling your attention. And meditation practices associated with changes in the amygdala brain region involves in emotional processing, leading to decreased emotional reactivity. So all these are coming from where? Meditation practices. Okay, only last section now, so thank you for being patient, but we are almost there now. So, many people ask this question, Bhagavad Gita 4,000, 5,000 years ago, what is the relevance of this now? How is it relevant? If you've been listening to what I've been saying, I don't need to answer that question to you anymore, because what I've kind of demonstrated, I hope, is that it is absolutely relevant today, and I'll show you why it is relevant. Because it deals with fundamental human condition and predicament. Whether you are from this continent or that continent, of this nation or that nation, or this citizen or that citizen, from this ethnic background or that ethnic background, all of us are going to suffer one way or the other, number one. Number two, we are caught up in this predicament of being human and the human condition. And therefore, we as human beings find existing in a created world, looking for meaning and purpose, looking, what am I here for? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to live my life, making meaning through actions in the world? And what we find is sorrow, suffering in the world. And of course, we have to deal with them unless we want to escape, but that is not an option. This is the predicament, has been there since the existence of human beings, and mind struggles just like Arjun did 5,000 years ago. As I will say it once more, Arjun is just Arjun, but he is also a representative of humanity, you and me. Arjun is the nimit matra to give this knowledge and to be able to practice and understand it. And at the end of the 18 chapters, he says, yes, I'm ready to go now. So how to deal with life? What choices do we make? On what basis to make those choices? How to experience life in meaningful, purposeful way is what everybody is looking for. If I ask you any of you this question, how do you deal with life and how do you make your choices? You will have some answers to that, right? So it teaches us 5 lessons of life. If you look at the whole of Bhagavad Gita and also the other scriptures, you can put it together in terms of 5 lessons of life. The thing which I tell people is that if you don't learn these 5 lessons of life, you will keep on suffering. But this is the underlying reality of our human condition. We all know that life is associated with sorrow one way or the other. It is associated with transiency. Nothing is permanent. If you read the Mandukya Upanishad and you read, Bhagwan Sri Ram in Yoga Vashishta, this is exactly what he's talking about, is that I see life and death. I see people dying. I see people suffering. I see that life is impermanent. And it causes dependencies. Therefore, we have to depend on various different things to be able to live our life. And it trains us every day. At the end of every day, we are full of conflict and confusion and we get exhausted. Number 5, dissatisfaction guaranteed with one thing or the other. If I ask you, what were you dissatisfied with in the last 24 hours? I bet you there'll be something you have to say. This thing was not very satisfactory. And therefore, these are the 5 lessons of life. If you don't confront them, if you don't know them, we will keep on suffering. For example, if you don't say that, understand that everything is transient and you keep on holding on to something that, I can't let go of this because if I lose it, I will lose it. But understanding that this too shall pass, whatever it is, transiency, nothing is permanent. So what are the practical lessons? Learn to become aware of everything, think, reflect, act wisely, selflessly. Have a noble idea or goal in life and be devoted to that purpose. These are somebody has got there. Okay, have a noble ideal and have a goal in life and be devoted to its purpose. I'm just simplifying the kind of precepts in the Bhagavad Gita and how they are related to mental health. Have a positive regard for yourself and others through kindness and compassion. Have a positive regard for yourself. Out of 100 clients I see, 80 of them will be without any kind of positive regard about themselves. They feel so bad about themselves. They keep on feeling guilty about themselves. They feel shameful about themselves. They've got low self-worth. They've got low self-esteem, beginning of mental health issues. Okay. So have a positive regard for yourself. This is what Bhagavad Gita is telling us. Become disciplined and focused in your mind and in your life, and become an integrated personality in your thought, word, and deed. All this are what Bhagavad Gita is taking us towards, and it is giving us very powerful methods of getting to this stage. Okay, so these are the practical lessons of Bhagavad Gita. So just to summarize then, Bhagavad Gita focuses on fundamental nature of human beings and human nature, and identifies the root cause of suffering as a cognitive error in understanding ourselves and our existence. We don't really know ourselves. We don't really know what is their out reality. Okay, and if we are prepared to make the journey, we go to the root cause of suffering and remove it from there. It gives a methodology of inner transformation that leads to equanimity, peace, and joy. And therefore, the inner transformation for spiritual goal is also the inner transformation for mental health, because both of them are looking for the same thing: equanimity, peace, and joy. And this transformation is achieved through inner and outer practices, through abhyas and vairagya. Keep on practicing, even if you're practicing 10 minutes a day, reading 2 verses of the Bhagavad Gita. This is what Puja Gurudev told me, Swami Chinmayanand. Just read 2 verses a day and think about it, and then try to put it in practice during that day. And let go, let go, let go of whatever is not essential to your life. Such a transformed mind becomes capable of coping with challenges and develops a resilient personality grounded in wisdom. Okay, so this is all what we have talked about. I took you step by step, trying to understand fundamental differences and to understand where these mental health issues are coming from, and seeing how Bhagavad Gita is giving us the solution in terms of what we can do. And I give you a particular example of the contemplative perspective. I could have, this is Dhyana Yoga, but I could have talked about Karma Yoga, which I did. Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, all these are practices which can lead to us good mental balance, inner equanimity, inner peacefulness. And then we talked about relevance of the Bhagavad Gita in modern times. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. This is a really revealing presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The floor is now open for questions and answer. I see already one hand up. M. Chav, I'm sorry, I'm not, don't have your full name. Vivek, if you don't mind. Yeah, sorry.